Greetings. Thank you very much for joining our Indiana Human Services mid-session webinar. This is a joint venture of Indiana Association of United Ways and Indiana Coalition for Human Services, and I am pleased to introduce our other two speakers for this session, Mark St. John and Maggie Snyder. We are recording this as a sort of halftime report for the 2015 session of the Indiana General Assembly. We are still catching up on multiple amendments in the final hours from last week, so please understand that this is just a quick overview of the human service related bills that were passed through the first chamber. If you have a question, please type that in the chat box or in the question box, and we will either answer your questions during the session as it flows, or we will answer at the end of the session, or even as a follow-up email directly to you. So again, I'm pleased to introduce Mark St. John, who serves as a lobbyist for the Indiana Association of Community Economic Development, and as well as a number of other organizations, including some who are not members of Coalition for Human Services. And he also co-chairs with me the Government Affairs Committee of the Indiana Coalition for Human Services. Maggie Snyder actually wears two hats, helping both staff the Coalition for Human Services and then working in public policy here at the Indiana Association of United Ways. So we will fly through the next few slides. Take it away, Mark.
So we provided some of the background information during the introductory webinar, so we're only going to hit mention some slides here as a teaser to review the prior session. Do remember that this is the long session where the big responsibility is to pass a 2-year budget that starts July 1st. Both the House and the Senate Republicans have what we've been calling super duper majorities, where the Democrats are far outnumbered, 71 Republicans to 29 Democrats in the House, 40 Republicans to 10 Democrats in the Senate. When you look at the vote counts on some of the bills, you're going to see a lot of those things nevertheless had some pretty broad support. But you are going to see some stuff where it was very partisan or where some philosophical issue has arisen. A good example is there's been some vote splits related to urban and rural schools, Tea Party or libertarian influences, religious influences, or how property taxes have affected local government. As covered in the prior session, the hot issues are usually the bills covered by the media. All four caucuses and the governor indicated that education would be the most important issue, and we have seen a lot of education-related legislation this session. The governor kind of announced his priorities both via his State of the State address and the budget that they presented. The House has made a few changes to his budget, which we're going to get into later. And of course, each of the caucuses have listed their own priorities. Here you can see some of the same themes around the budget, education, jobs, and opportunities. The House Republicans have prioritized and advanced ethics reform at the same time, and much of the House and Senate Republicans' priorities have been moved forward here in the first half of the session.
Maggie?
And for the last 2 years, the Indiana Coalition for Human Services has grouped our priorities in 5 areas. Healthy Hoosiers, where in January we were pleased to see federal approval of HIP 2.0, and we also advocate for working Hoosiers, workforce-ready graduates, accountability, and thriving communities. We've been very focused on the state budget this year. The graphics at the right illustrate how our state dollars have been invested in the last budget, with the majority going towards education. So which will continue into the next budget as well. The majority of the revenues came from individuals and families through state sales tax and income tax. Because we are so concerned about the budget, we at the Indiana Coalition for Human Services have launched the Invest in Hoosiers campaign, and we'll go over that more later. But we will now run through the many bills that we have been following so far. The next 9 slides, we're simply listing some of the bills grouped by our ICHS priorities. Note that over 1,200 bills were filed, not including resolutions. On the following slides, we have grayed out the bills that have died. So we are listing their bill numbers so you may link directly to the bill to see when specifically it died. For example, if a bill was not heard in committee, it would not have had a chance. Some bills were heard and were even amended and sent to the floor for a vote where they died. Others were not called down for a vote, effectively allowing the bills to die.
Thanks, Becky. So ICHS is most concerned about health care coverage and closing the gap. And as Maggie mentioned, we're really thrilled with the recent approval of HIP 2.0. And if we have time at the end, we may give you a quick update about HIP 2.0 and some of the current activities. The bills that we've seen in the health area tend to be very specific health issues. And human service advocates are very happy to see some of these bills advance, including domestic violence funding, increased funding to address infant mortality, and several bills related to mental health services. There's been a lot of focus on addiction issues, particularly around designer drugs and pain management medication, and we'll continue to see those bills moving forward. Additionally, AARP and senior advocates are pleased to see the caregiver legislation advance. So this is just a quick list of some of the bills in that health area and now in the health area related to senior and people with disabilities. I'll let Mark talk a little bit about some of the working Hoosiers issues.
So helping Hoosiers have better jobs, helping working Hoosier families has been a focus this legislative session for many legislators and for the coalition. In terms of work share activities, that has not moved forward. That is a change is related to how it would work with unemployment stuff. Issues around tax credits for hired individuals, intern eligibility for unemployment benefits, a variety of things have not passed. I would point out that some changes to public employee retirement fund plans have moved forward, which includes a cost of living for retirees. There, in the same line though, there have been some a lot of time has been spent on issues about the common wage, construction wage, and there's people on both sides of that argument. But either way, it would affect the income for working Hoosier families.
Yep, and we will see more of that. That's actually one of those bills where we had a vote split that wasn't just a partisan vote. So I'm going to talk a little bit about education. As you know, it's been a high priority for each of the 4 caucuses and the governor. We see lots of bills before the Senate Education and the House Education Committees. So if you have attended one of those meetings, they are marathon meetings. I'm going to talk about a number of different issues. So first, starting with early care and education. While there were a number of bills and we would have liked to have seen the pre-K pilot expanded, we're really pleased that the budget, which is House Bill 1001, so we're not always listing that on every page, but the budget bill certainly includes lots of these efforts. The budget bill does include the continuation of the pre-K pilot in only those 5 counties. It also counts kindergartners as one instead of a fraction of a student in the school funding formula, which is different than has been funded for kindergarten in the past. And then finally, we call your attention to this House Bill 1616, which we from a United Way perspective are thrilled, and from a Coalition for Human Services perspective, thrilled to see a bill that will help smooth the cliff effect that happens in child care, so that as a parent's income increases, they also increase their co-pays. Right now, they lose all benefits when they hit 171% of poverty. This bill would allow them to continue up to 250% of poverty. So we're excited about that advancement. There are a number of other bills that you can see. Again, all of those listed that are grayed out did not pass. But you see lots of very active bills, some very big omnibus bills that we'll talk about. But you see very specific issues like the issue of cursive writing and criminal background checks for teachers and for school employees. And then you see, oh, excuse me, I don't know why we have various election matters. I think that's supposed to be various education matters. I apologize. That's a typo. We'll fix that. And then you see a number of the other education issues, and these are the issues that you've seen on the front page of your paper. So let's just talk a little bit about some of the big issues in school funding. So I don't know, Mark, if you want to address this page?
Certainly. State board governance revolves around the role of the State Board of Education, which is appointed by the governor, versus the superintendent of public instruction. Under current law, the superintendent of public instruction chairs the State Board of Education. And this bill, Senate Bill 1, would change that in saying that they select their own chair. It also changes some of the appointments to the State Board of Education. Highly contentious issue, and the votes have been pretty well on a partisan basis. Another bill, Senate Bill 500, deals with, broadly we'll say, school deregulation. A group of superintendents have been pushing this regarding things that they felt like encumbered their ability to efficiently administer a district. I think I said that properly. It is not the same bill as it started, but there are still a number of concerns about, and a lot of discussion about, what's the role of a school with things other than directly education, reporting requirements, etc. School funding. This may be one of the toughest bills or issues out there. Overall funding for K through 12 education has been increased by $400 million. At the same time, they've changed the complexity index and levels the base per student funding. The complexity index relates to issues around ethnicity, poverty, etc. And they've made some changes to how they do that. The bottom line is that at this point, there are winners and losers. There are a number of urban school districts. Gary is one of those. Evansville is another, and several, where they have losing funding despite the overall increase. Some small and rural school districts have also lost funding. The big winners in this have been suburban areas. The Fishers or Newburghs of the world, so to speak. It's a highly contentious issue, and it still relates to it's all in the budget bill. And I think you'll see a lot more about that here in the coming 2 months. Lastly, a lot of discussion about I-STEP and testing. Some of you may recall that there was a discussion about the length of the test. They have made some changes to the test, including doing away with the social studies part of the test in order to reduce the total time there. At the same time, there's another bill that eludes me that would change the testing requirements for charter and voucher-related schools. So again, this issue around ISTEP is not done for this legislative session.
Right, and I'll just add to that Senator Kenley has asked the question more recently, shouldn't we just abandon ISTEP altogether and move to a national off-the-shelf kind of test like Iowa Basic Skills or something to that effect? So I anticipate we will have more questions about testing in the coming months. So let's move on. The last area of the Workforce Ready Graduates is really sort of our catch-all around Department of Child Services. Over the last several years, we've seen lots of bills around improving the Department of Child Services, increasing the call center and the response time for child protection. We're not seeing as many bills related to DCS this year. The one bill that is moving forward is sort of an agency cleanup bill with just addressing a number of issues from the administration. In the thriving community area, we see lots of room to celebrate from the human services community. We're very excited to see the 211 funding moving forward. There are lots of tax credit issues that we are pleased about or on the fence about, depending upon where you sit. As you know, there have been a couple efforts to ensure that there's a thorough review of all tax expenditures, which means anything that would basically cost the government, whether it be a deduction, an exemption, or a tax credit. So all tax incentives are supposed to be reviewed on a biannual basis by the Legislative Services Agency, and there's a bill that clarifies that review process that's moving forward. There's a number of bills related to tax issues that we have not listed here that all have to do with property tax issues. The PETA-BOA is the Property Tax Appeal Board, so the Board of Appeals when there's a question about assessment. The one area that we really want to celebrate is that there were two bills that included a repeal of the Neighborhood Assistance Program tax credit as well as a number of other credits. And those NAP credits have been preserved thanks to many of the advocates around the state. So they were removed. The repeal was removed from both Senate Bill 441 and 1349, and we are hopeful that we will keep those repeals out through the second half of the session. There is one bill or one tax credit that continues to remain repealed, and that is the IDA tax credit. And there's a conversation going on right now to see if the IDA tax credit could take a route that was taken by the historic rehab folks, and that is to say, legislators, if you take away our tax credit, could you at least replace it with additional funds in the budget? Because that's really what the goal is to provide more historic rehab or to provide more IDAs or individual development accounts. So more to come on IDAs if that's your area. And then lastly, there were some really exciting areas in the rooftop solar panel conversation, and that bill actually died despite a very contentious hearing. I don't know if you want to say anything more about that one.
I can speak to these two bills briefly here. The rooftop solar panel bill, House Bill 1320, would have really throttled the ability for people to use rooftop solar and some other renewable energy on their homes. And it had to do with who pays for what and how with the regulated utilities. Concurrently, the Energy Efficiency Plans Bill, Senate Bill 412, has moved to the House, and there is a fair amount of contention there. This is about replacing the energy efficiency program that the legislature, in essence, removed the authority for last legislative session. There are concerns that some issues around rooftop solar could get amended into Senate Bill 412. So this is a reminder that in the Indiana General Assemblies, nothing is dead until they go home.
Thanks, Mark. And then in one last area of the Thriving Communities area, we talk about some of the good government initiatives. And three of those initiatives are moving forward, and that's legislative ethics. As Mark mentioned earlier, the House Republicans prioritize that, and they are moving forward. The reforms would actually provide greater disclosure of conflicts of interest and of the types of income or benefits, but it does not preclude those benefits. So it's still not as stringent as other states, but advocates are considering that successful progress. Legislators recognize that because it's a part-time legislature, they cannot or will not remain conflict-free, but they are paying more attention, asking whether conflicts of interest are direct, unique, and substantial. So those are sort of the three criteria that they're using. In terms of redistricting plan, there's a bill moving forward that would create a study committee, or excuse me, another study commission about redistricting, and then various election law matters. There are a number of bills that deal with election issues, but the ones that seem to be advancing are those that deal with when specific issues that we've had over the last couple of years, and that's when a person moves out of a district or moves into a district, or when they resign from their seat. So those are moving forward.
There are a couple of other election bills, names elude me here. One would prohibit straight ticket voting. There was one that died, but there's another one that's moving. Also, some changes to absentee voting, whereby a person would have to provide their voter identification number to apply for an absentee ballot. These are both issues that are highly partisan, and the votes were on completely party line votes.
Thanks, Mark. We will try to make sure that we update those for the distribution of the slides afterwards so that you can follow along as well. So Maggie, why don't we change gears a little?
Okay. We mentioned this a little bit last time, but again, at the beginning of the session, the ICHS board invested its resources to launch the Invest in Hoosiers campaign, which aims to change the conversation about our state's budget. We called on legislators to make Hoosiers a priority and to start making strategic investments in the budget once again. We have advocated for investments in programs and services that have been proven to do the most good for everyday Hoosiers and that improve the overall economic vitality of our state. We asked for investments in quality child care and preschool, textbooks, school counselors, tax credits for workers, and financial opportunities for working adults to gain skills. Here you can see our top 5 priorities for the campaign. And here you see the very specific policies and investments we would like to see in the budget, grouped by each of the categories. As you can see from this slide, at the halftime of the session, we celebrate many important investments and applaud the House for including these in the budget, sometimes even over the governor's recommendations. This includes more money for transit, domestic violence, sexual assault, community corrections, adult guardianship, 21st century scholars, and 211. We will need to work hard to preserve these investments in the Senate, and we will need your help. Here are ways that you can get involved. Kristen Clements-Effner helps staff this campaign and is working hard to recruit supporters. We are asking each of you to link your Facebook page and Twitter. Please sign up at investinhoosiers.org, and if you are willing to place an op-ed or letter to the editor about the state budget in your local paper, please contact us. The Invest in Hoosiers campaign is about all of us working together to make sure our legislators know how important these investments are to their constituents and to local communities.
Great, thanks. And if that slide was hard to read of the actual budget, we can forward that copy out that compared the governor's budget to the 2013 budget to the House version of the budget. So again, going back just as a reminder for those of you who may be new, so this gives a snapshot of just a few of those human service items in the budget. The budget is a several hundred-page bill that lists each item in by state agency if it flows through a state agency, and then we compared it to the prior year or the House version. The governor's version of the budget, which was introduced. What we will see in the Senate side is that the Senate will now come up with its own version of the budget, and the differences will be worked out in conference committee. So we'll be talking about that more. So we encourage you to get involved in the Invest in Hoosiers campaign because we really do need to preserve those new investments. So just a quick update on HIP, because I know HIP is a very important program for a lot of folks on this call. HIP 2.0 was approved in late January, and the state had been working eagerly on this. We'd all been eager for the approval, and the state had been working in earnest to put together some of the plans. So they hit the ground running as soon as that approval was offered. So FSSA has already been transitioning lots of former Medicaid candidates or Medicaid recipients, and then former HIP recipients, and then those who were on the marketplace but had incomes between 100 and 138% of the federal poverty level. So all of those folks are being transitioned into HIP Plus. And then if they don't make their payments, the fallback is the HIP Basic Plan, which is basically a scaled down version of the HIP program. We are encouraging as many of consumers as possible to stay on Plus, and the way to get on Plus is to apply online, to pay for Plus, which means making monthly payments, and those payments can be made by a third party. They can be made by a nonprofit or an employer. And then there's a lot of consumer behavior changes that will also be happening with this transition to HIP Plus, and that is making sure that folks use the health care appropriately, because there are higher copays if a person goes to the emergency room, for example, when it's not considered an emergency. So our key messages that we're trying to convey to consumers are apply online, pay for Plus, make the monthly payments, and call the number on the back of the card once you're in the program before you access services to make sure that you're eligible for the services you're about to seek. All of the information is on the HIP website at hip.in.gov. It's a great program, and if there's a desire, we can, there's lots of information on the FSSA website, and we would direct your attention to that. So lastly, we want to give you just the quick reminder of how to take part in this work. So Maggie told you how to join the Invest in Hoosiers campaign. I want to just take over, or take a few minutes of your time to remind you about how to get involved. Just to remind you that nonprofits are allowed to advocate. There are some rules. If you have specific types of federal or state grants, you need to read those grant contracts. But it's just important to know the rules and then have your volunteers tell your story, because that's all that advocacy is. It's really just telling your story about why you do the work that you do, what your mission is, and how your clients are helped or affected by certain programs or policies. So these are just a few ways that we remind our friends and our partners how to get started in policy. If you've not been down that road before, we do have some advocacy workshops and advocacy tools and techniques that we can recommend. But what we ask everybody on this call is to not be afraid to have conversations with your legislators. You know, your legislators, everyone has one representative and one senator in the State House, and you are their expert about your area of interest and your area of work. So we encourage you to have a relationship with your legislator. Have your board members submit guest editorials or letters to the editor. You might attend a third House session, and I'm going to just show you an example of how to look at the calendar. We maintain, this is our IAUW website, And we maintain a third house session calendar, so you can see every weekend this month. Legislators are typically in town from Monday through Thursday, and they have session on Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday, and then they have committee meetings sort of sprinkled throughout the week, and mostly committee meetings on Wednesdays. Legislators go home on Friday, and many of them go home and have a Meet Your Legislator Day or a third house session. We encourage you to attend those, and so there's detail on each of these. So let's just look at what's going on this weekend. I'll just pick on one. So here's the Greater Valparaiso Chamber of Commerce is hosting one, you can see, or the Kosciuszko County Chamber. They're often sponsored by a League of Women Voters or a Chamber of Commerce or maybe a public library. So we encourage you to attend your local third house session. We encourage you to educate your board, your volunteers, and your staff about these important issues, because if your organization receives funding through the budget, then the budget session is really important to you. If you have clients that are affected by disability services or transit services, it's important to know those impacts. Everyone has relationships, everyone who knows someone who knows someone who knows a legislator. And then lastly, be willing to host a tour or a session to talk about a specific issue. Legislators really do like to learn from local folks about how state policies affect local folks. So we encourage you to participate in a State House Day. Here are just a few of them that have been held this session. And then lastly, we encourage you to subscribe to the newsletters. Indiana Association of United Ways offers a policy update every odd Friday, and ICHS newsletter offers one twice a month throughout the legislative session and then monthly after the legislative session. We encourage you to communicate with us, telling us what you're hearing in local communities, if there's an issue that you're hearing about, whether it be with a state agency or a process or a policy. We like to hear that because that helps us be better advocates, and we see this as a partnership with you. Both of our organizations post bill lists every week, and those are updated on a real-time basis because of the service that we use. And then lastly, when there's opportunity to coordinate testimony, we like to coordinate that. So maybe you can't take time out of your busy day to come to Indianapolis to testify on a bill, but maybe you can send us a story. So I'll give you a prime example. With the Neighborhood Assistance Tax Credits, we collected stories from around the state of what that means to a local community, so we can say that Living Well in Wabash County uses the tax credits for this purpose of helping transport seniors. We can say how it helps build homes with Habitat for Humanity, or how it helps provide child care to families who don't qualify for CCDF. So when you send us those stories, we can incorporate those into our testimony. So we encourage you to get involved. So lastly, I will let us turn to questions. So I'm going to see if I can pull up the questions, and let's see. Do we have any questions? You can type them in the question box or in the chat box about any of the specific bills or any of the specific issues we covered. All right. Well, we must have covered it. So don't hang up. Don't end the call. What we'll do is we will conclude this webinar after giving you a couple key websites. We mentioned a couple coalitions and a couple key websites. I just want to bring those to your attention. You're welcome to use those websites. And then we want to thank you for all that you do to help support our neighbors in need. So I will conclude this webinar. Don't hang up, and we will have an offline conversation. So hold just one moment. Thank you for joining us.